Good afternoon and welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In continuation with the series on Indian sociological tradition, in today's lecture we're going to discuss about the work of an Indian sociologist, Andre Beteille. We will in the lecture see how Andre Beteille has contributed to the development of sociology in India and has kind of led the foundation for a Weberian understanding of Indian social reality. So let us begin by looking at his biography in terms of having the understanding of the context in which Andre Beteille was writing. So we know that he is one of the best known sociologists of India, having kind of contributed, written extensively on Indian sociology for almost more than 30 years. He was a professor at the Department of Sociology, Delhi School of Economics, and also taught at Oxford, Cambridge, Chicago, and London School of Economics. He is renowned for giving a new direction to the study of caste, inequality, and social stratification in India. We have been mentioning his work when we were looking into the study of caste in India and also the development of sociology in India. So we will see that how Andre Beteille brings about a paradigm shift in the way in which sociology as a discipline nurtured and grows in Indian society. So in 2005, in recognition to the work that he did in the field of sociology and also because of his distinguished service to the nation, Andre Beteille received the Padma Bhushan Award. So that in itself tells about the amount of work that he has done and contribution to the field of sociology. If we look into his childhood and his growing up, we see that his father was a French mayor and in the Chandamarpur municipality, and the mother was a cultured Bengali lady. So we have the kind of intellectual background under which Andre Beteille was growing up. He studied at Chandamarpur and at boarding school in Patna before moving to Calcutta in 1946, just before independence. In Bengal, that is Calcutta, he completed his graduation from St. Xavier's College, and as a student he studied physics but halfway switched to anthropology, inspired by the work of N.K. Bose, a renowned anthropologist, and later he kind of becomes Andre Beteille's intellectual mentor. In his work, we will see that Andre Beteille was also influenced by the work of Evans Pritchard, an anthropologist who studied the newer society. In terms of his education, he completed his honours in anthropology at University of Calcutta and also completed MSc from the same university. After a brief period of stay at Indian Statistical Institute as a research fellow, Beteille started teaching degree courses. He started the newly set up Department of Sociology at Delhi School of Economics, University of Delhi, as a lecturer in sociology. This department at Delhi School of Economics had been started by M.N. Srinivas, a renowned Indian sociologist. So Andre Beteille registered himself as a PhD scholar under the supervision of M.N. Srinivas. When we look into the amount of work or books that he has written, we see that his work kind of captures every small and complex detail of Indian society. His classical work, which is also a part of his PhD, was Caste, Class and Power, Changing Pattern of Stratification in Tanjore Village, published in 1965. After that, he published Caste, Old and New, Essays in Social Structure, Social Stratification, published in 1969. Then Inequality and Social Change, 1972. The fourth work, which also looks into the inequality in agrarian social structure, which published in 1974. Inequality among men, so it's also kind of bringing about gender perspective in understanding Indian society. The sixth book is Backward Classes and the New Social Order. Here we will see how he was kind of critically looking into the reservation policy and kind of trying to understand equality as a balance of power. The seventh book is Idea of Natural Inequality and Other Essays. The eighth book is Essays in Comparative Sociology. Now, this comparative sociology, we will see in the course of the lecture, is important to understand the discipline of sociology, which was published in 1987. Society and Politics in India, Essay in Comparative Perspective, published in 1991. So by 1990s, we see a large-scale transformation taking place in the Indian society because of the interplay between caste and politics, and people started kind of questioning the nexus that was being established. This is what he will look into the book Society and Politics in India. His 10th book is Antinomies of Society, Essays on Ideologies and Institutions, where he is trying to look into how ideology kind of affects the way in which institutions are conceptualized and discourse formations takes place. The 11th book is Sociology, Essay on Approach and Method. 12th, Equality and Universality, Essay in Social and Political Theory. And 13th is Marxism and Class Analysis, where he will critically look into the relevance of Marxist analysis for understanding Indian society. Now, this is only a kind of some of the classical work which reflects on the work that Andre Beteille as a sociologist contributed to the understanding of Indian society. When we talk about Andre Beteille as a sociologist, we try to understand that he was a player who brought about a game change in sociology of India. So he was trying to establish a new direction for understanding society, and therefore he begins by critically looking into the established tradition. Established tradition were the theories which had kind of arrived at grand generalization. So one of the theory or perspective which was utilized at that time for understanding society of India was functionalism. And functionalism was used for understanding the relevance of caste system in Indian society. So caste system was defined as an integral feature of Indian society, leading to reciprocity and interdependence. Beteille kind of moves away from functional and brings in dysfunctional. He says at times the system becomes disharmonic. So he's moving beyond caste and bringing in the interrelation between caste, class and power. Then we see that large number of debates in that point of time was between sociology and anthropologists, and the debate was that both the disciplines were kind of opposed to each other. The general understanding was that anthropologists were studying the other society. So anthropologists from Western country came to African, Asian countries to study the simple society, and sociologists were studying the industrial complex society. So, but the question that emerged was that what if a sociologist studied tribes in India? Was it a part of social anthropology or sociology? Beteille would kind of negate the distinction between the two, and he said that so they are kind of integrated. It's an interdisciplinary way of understanding. He also criticized Dumont and Srinivas in their approach to understanding of caste system. Dumont, Gurek, Srinivas, they were kind of looking into the Brahminic superiority and Sanskritic dominance that was kind of important for understanding caste hierarchy. Andre Beteille kind of understands that when we look into caste, it is not the only dimension which is important for understanding society. It is important to look into three levels of interactions or stratifications. So rather than applying a caste perspective to understand Indian society, it is important to understand through the lens of stratification. So we kind of not only emphasize on production and exploitation, but also look into the dynamic he was kind of giving us a diffusist and dynamic approach to understand society, where you had to understand the structure as well as understand the changes that was taking place in that structure. So we're looking into how his understanding of sociology kind of helps us to also throw light on how the discipline was different from common sense. So he is saying that we need to differentiate sociology from common sense, because common sense is limited in its reach. It's kind of a set of idea which is prevalent among a group of people, whereas sociology kind of arrives at certain understanding which could be applied in a larger context. So a sociologist looks into a lot of unexamined assumptions and explains everyday phenomena from a scientific perspective. So according to Beteille, sociology should not go against common sense. So it's not saying that they are completely opposed to each other. The idea is that what common sense stops, sociology begins. So sociologist goes further in depth into the assumptions which is kind of labeled as common sense, and develops a broader and a deeper view of the operation of the society at an empirical level. So the subject matter of sociology is kind of far more complex than what appears to be. So if we go by the whole idea that many a time certain common sense understanding also kind of gives a negative or a wrong understanding of a situation, and sociologist kind of uncovers the reality and brings forth a completely new dimension to understand society. So when we look into the distinction between sociology and common sense, we realize that Andre Beteille was advocating the development of an sociology as an intellectual discipline, and in that sense he views sociology for having three attributes. For Beteille, sociology is an empirical science. So he moves from the grand generalization, which was part of the Western discourse, the way in which sociology was developing, where grand theories were being built. He says it's important to move beyond grand theories and look into the way in which realities are actually experienced in everyday life. Second, it's a systematic science. So common sense would be a lot of unorganized idea. There could be no systematic link between different components. When we look into sociology as a discipline, it is systematic. It is enable us to kind of systematically look at the interrelation between different parts of the society, different institutions, as well as different kind of interactions and interrelations. Third, it is a comparative science. As an empirical science, it seeks to maintain a clear distinction between value judgment and judgment of reality, or between out question and is question. So when he's talking about empirical science, is also kind of helping us to understand how sociology needs to be kind of more value free, and therefore he is kind of being very impressed by Bavarian understanding of society. The sociologist seeks to examine in a systematic way the interconnection between social process. So we need, if we were to understand, say, the institution of family in India today, we need to connect it to kinship, marriage, economic, political change, the composition of family in the past, and the historical component. Only then we'll be able to arrive at a holistic understanding. The most important part of Andre Beteille's approach to sociology was his emphasis on comparative method. In several books, he is emphasizing on use of the comparative method, where he is trying to tell us that comparison or comparative method not only helps us to come out with the difference between two institutions or two processes, but it also helps us to understand the similarity. So for Beteille, sociology is a comparative science which kind of rests on a lot on observation and inquiry of human society. the sociologist's own society as well as other society. So here we can kind of see that a sociologist's understanding of his own society would be incomplete until unless there is a reference to the other society and comparison is arrived at. So in the chapter, some observation on comparative method from the book Sociology, Essays on Approach and Method, Andre Beteille talks about earlier comparative methods. So if we kind of look into the history of sociology as a discipline, in the beginning of the discipline, anthropology and sociology, comparative method was used by most of the sociologists. Whether we talk about Durkheim and the others, they were using comparative method. And the attention was basically in comparison of the complex industrial Western society versus the non-Western society, which was categorized as simple and underdeveloped. So most of the evolutionary theory, which was trying to give us the argument of society evolving, was based on the comparison of different society. But then it cannot be kind of complete if we just do a comparison of single society. Andre Beteille asserted that comparative method is a tool of investigation designed consequently to discover the general features of all society. So one of the positive outcome of comparative method, according to Beteille, is that through the process of comparison, it helps us to kind of identify the general features, and that kind of helps us to then kind of arrive. So we see that most of the time we read caste system in India, Louis Dumont, Ghurre, G.S. Ghurre, they all give us these are the features of caste system. Now much of these features are coming of caste was coming in comparison to class in the West society. Andre Beteille's main concern was with comparison of society and the comparison of the tradition, the two traditions, and through this he would kind of contribute to the sociology of understanding the society. His own study of the caste system reflects the use of the comparative method, and it is there where he is also kind of different or unique, because he is not using the book view, which was, or the ideological view, which was the practice at that time. He is moving from there and kind of doing an empirical study in which he is doing a comparison using the comparative method. As we've already said, that Andre Beteille was concerned with the relationship between sociology and social anthropology. His concern about this was published in his book 6 Essays in Comparative Sociology, published in 1974. Later on again, he presented the same idea, that is the relation between sociology and anthropology, in his book published in 2004. As we've already discussed, that Andre Beteille did not accept the divide between sociology and social anthropology, though the way the two disciplines was emerging in India was kind of put up in two separate parts. So the sociology was beginning as a discipline in Lucknow, anthropology in Calcutta, and also the sociology as a part of social sciences and humanity, anthropology as a part of the physical sciences. But this distinction was not relevant when it came to the study of Indian society. To Beteille, sociology and anthropology were interwoven in such a manner that was difficult to detract them from each other. So relationship between the two disciplines, specifically in the context of India, is not the same when we look into how the two disciplines functioned in France or Britain. Both the subject, that is sociology and anthropology, are more or less investigating social reality, the society, and therefore this divide between the two of studying your own society versus studying the other society is kind of superficial. The two disciplines had marked out distinct overlapping domain, with sociology studying the us, the advanced industrial society of the West, and the anthropologists studying them or others and the rest. So you had British anthropologists from Evans Pritchard, Malinowski, Ratcliffe Brown, Durkheim, all going and studying the other society. But when it comes to India, there is no difference in the study of society, and both are one in that direction. Now, when we look into how Andre Beteille, as a sociologist, kind of selects a particular area, that is stratification, inequality, it is important to understand why he selects one area compared to the other, because the trend at his time was largely anthropological. Much of the study was being done on kinship, marriage, religion, and ritual. But Andre Beteille chose to study class and stratifications, which was obviously the concern of sociologists. He departs significantly from the writings of his time, and therefore he is not kind of interested in just studying caste as a hierarchy. His concern is to focus more on system of stratification, and stratification not in the kind of very neat compartment, but is influenced by Evans Pritchard. So he will be talking about segmentation, caste divided into subcaste, and even within the Brahmins, you have relations of disharmony or conflict within members of the different subcaste. He was kind of more influenced by Weber rather than Karl Marx, and therefore he uses the triology of class, status, and party, the approach of Weber to stratification, and he changes to caste, class, and power in understanding the Indian society. He places caste before class, whereas Weber puts status after class. So the three dimension of stratification in Indian society would be the unequal access to land holding, which is leading to class structure. Then you have unequal access to power, and the third is unequal access to status emerging from the position in the caste hierarchy. He is also kind of considered as bringing a pioneering in the village study. He brought two significant change in the way in which villages were studied in India. The first change was his shifting from generalization to empirical observation. Much of the understanding, and this we have already discussed in the previous lecture on village study. During the colonial time, much of the documentation of village study, village being described as isolated unit, was coming from a kind of generalization. He is shifting and going into more idea of empirical documentary and functionalism in terms of understanding the villages. The second shift is the bringing in the idea that in the villages not a single hierarchy works, but there are multiple hierarchies. So multiple hierarchies in the sense that we will be talking about the inequality emerging from land access, inequality from status, and also because of the difference in terms of access to power. The earlier village study by F.G. Belly, Adrian Mehrer, and Mackim Merritt, they were looking into the caste structure. They were looking into how caste was affecting kinship, how it was affecting economic structure. Beteille is adding class and power to the rural agrarian structure. So he is also focusing on change in social structure. He criticized Dumont, Homo hierarchicus, for portraying Indian society as kind of static and unchanging. And he looks into, through the dynamics of the interrelation of caste, class, and power, that they are kind of not static. They are undergoing change. There is a lot of dynamism. The economic political changes has led to the change in the structure of agrarian rural structure. So he understands the process of change and changing relationship at the level of caste, class, and power that brings about a change in rural stratification system in India. So that is how we can try to place Andre Beteille in the context at time when he is trying to build a sociology of India through his application of Max Weber's approach to understand social stratification in India. With this, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.